Good morning, everybody, and welcome to another week of the Live with the Renk show. I so do appreciate you tuning in back in. But today, I'm happy to announce that Speaker of the House, Jase Bolger, Republican from Marshall, Michigan, is in the studio for, unfortunately, from my point of view, his last interview as Speaker of the House. Good morning, Jase, or Speaker. Maybe I see go that way, huh?
Jase, please. Good morning, Renk.
Appreciate you coming in very much. You are term limited out, so you'll be done by the end of the year.
I will, yes.
And you didn't run for anything else,
No.
so I guess you're going to join us in the private world.
Yeah, I'll tell you about an interaction on filing deadline I had with my wife, Molly. I said, well, the filing deadline is here, and I'm not going to be on the ballot. I said, but if there weren't term limits, would we run again? She said, yeah, and on the whole, it's been worth it. And then she pretty quickly said, but I'm not sad there's term limits.
I understand. I was speaking to someone yesterday. I went to a holiday party, and they were saying it's a shame that the term limits. I guess they were a supporter of yours, or like at least what you were doing in office. But I kind of like term limits, but maybe not. I'd be open to a discussion of making them a little longer here in the state of Michigan. But I have many questions for the Speaker, Jase Bolger. Do you? 269-441-9595. Give us a call. You'll be able to speak to him. You'll be here for the whole hour. Also, you can email me at Renk, R-E-N-K, at townsquaremedia.com, or go to one of my websites, WJIMAM.com in Lansing, WKMI.com in Kalamazoo, or here, my flagship station, WBCKFM.com. Comment on the post I have out there about the interview, and we will, I should get those sent to me, and I'll ask them if I can. Well, Jase, I guess let's dispense with the normal end of the term interviews and you're not running questions. What do you believe were your greatest successes in the last 4 years as Speaker?
Well, there were a lot of different things that we sought to resolve that had gone unresolved for far too long in Michigan. You remember back when we were elected and asked to lead our state had lost about 800,000 jobs. Our state had no money in its savings account, mounting debt, more debt year after year, a $1.5 billion structural deficit. And people,
why don't you explain what that structural deficit is? Sorry, we're interrupting.
Well, you saw, if you remember back then, the government shutdowns repeatedly, and you saw a legislature and a governor who used accounting gimmicks and patchwork to balance the budget, supposedly on paper, but they were continually back at it because the money wasn't there. So they were overusing projections. They were transferring money from one to the other. The bottom line is the budget was not structurally balanced, and there was more debt every year for our kids to inherit.
Right, because the debt basically was built in to the budget from a structural standpoint.
Well, as is happening with the federal government, they'll pay their current bills but not put money away for their future bills. So in the biggest case, it's promising government retirees their health care and retirement, but at that point not putting any money away for it. It was promising pensions, but not putting enough money away for pensions. So things like that were mounting future problems for our kids to inherit. So we were asked to govern and lead, and today Michigan is a state that has over 300,000 more jobs. We're a state that has a budget that's not been shut down. In fact, it's been balanced about 3 months ahead of time, 4 years in a row. We're a state that is structurally balanced, and we're a state that has more money in our savings account, over $500 million now in our savings account, and about $20 billion less in debt. Really exciting. The governor's got the best quote on it. He says, if you want to run for a sweet job, run for governor in 2038. What's he mean by that? We're on a path today. If this continues today, then in 2038, which sounds like a long way away, but remember it's less than 25 years away, we will be debt-free. We will be a state that has no debt because we've realized all of our liabilities and we've embarked on the process to pay them down. So overall, I think that's the biggest accomplishment, jobs and making sure that we took care of our budget. But you also have issues like right to work. You have Detroit's bankruptcy settlement and seeing Detroit come out of bankruptcy on a path for success. You've got a lot of things that we sought to achieve, and there are things that I talked about on opening day in 2011 and 2013 that we can chronicle as well if you want more details.
Well, I would like that, but I want to talk to you about one thing, the big 2038, that's the big if in there, depending if we have responsible politicians elected in the future. And two is, how were you, the Senate and the governor, able to balance the budget early, whereas the previous Granholm administration was not able to? Now, did it have to do with the fact that you were all on the same page, being all Republican controlled, and not necessarily, some more conservative than others? And with Governor Granholm, she didn't have that type of, all Democrat controlled. What was the difference between the two?
Well, certainly it helps to all have been the same party, but Governor Granholm had Democrat House at the time, and they were not on the same page. I think it's discipline. And I think it's a determination to get the job done. Now, I can assure you, even though we are of the same party, that I frustrate the governor at times, and that the Senate and I get frustrated with each other at times because we don't always agree. But what I enjoy in this process that we have in Lansing right now is that it's never my way or the highway. Instead, here's the problem, and there's competing solutions to solve that problem. But there's a determination to get the job done. So we're not going to browbeat each other into only getting exactly what we want and the way we want it. We're going to join hands and get the job done on the problem that's in front of us.
Well, that leads us then. You made an opening for this road funding bill. And we can get back to the other accomplishments, and I want to know what you believe you, for lack of a better term, failed at, not getting done what you wanted to.
Sure.
But you just said about there's competing plans.
Mm-hmm.
And I know right now there's two, because I think Governor Snyder is behind the Senate plan.
Correct.
Of 100% tax and fee increases to fund the road infrastructure improvements. You in the House just passed a bill that would not raise taxes on gas, at least immediately, but would over 6 years, as you're phasing out this the flat tax on the gas and phasing in the wholesale, right? You're going to a percentage of wholesale.
That's correct.
and trying to do other things to make up the $1.2 billion.
Yeah.
Why don't you explain the House's position and your bill and try to convince people how you believe it can be done without raising taxes immediately like the quote-unquote Republican Senate wants to do, and the House doesn't.
Sure. Well, the Senate has a plan that would take 4 years to get there, but it's entirely tax increases. So there's a $1.2 billion problem. We are underinvesting in our roads and infrastructure, and just like any other maintenance, like at your home, if you don't stay on top of it, it gets more expensive to maintain. So we've got a $1.2 billion problem, and the Senate seeks over the next 4 years to raise taxes to fill that $1.2 billion need. Now, the House plan seeks simply to dedicate the money you pay at the pump, dedicate the taxes that you pay at the pump to fixing the roads. That's the end of the story. That's what it does. Now, to try to mitigate the impact, because what happens today is you have a 19-cent per gallon gas tax. That all does go to fix the roads. But in Michigan, we are rare. Not all states charge sales tax on gasoline, but Michigan does. And that sales tax does not go to our roads. That's why we have high taxes on our gas, but low investment in our roads. And so the House plan seeks to reverse that, seeks to correct that. If I go back to 1997, the last time the legislature tried to fix the roads, there were two flaws in what they did. Number one, they did a 19-cent per gallon tax instead of a percentage tax. And the reason I say that's a flaw is because road building is driven by the same thing that drives gas prices. That's oil prices. The product that makes up asphalt and the big machinery that they use that requires gasoline, oil prices drive both. And so when they didn't make it a percentage, it didn't keep up with inflation. And unadjusted, we are collecting less money for our roads today than we did in 1997. So that's number one. If they had just made it a percentage, we wouldn't have a problem today.
Why? Do you have any idea why they did it? And my guest is Speaker of the House here in the state of Michigan, Jase Bolger, Republican from Marshall. Why did they do a flat? Because I try to take things logically, intelligently, and that's understandable. Do I want to pay more taxes? No, but I understand if it's not adjusted for inflation at the minimum. it's difficult.
Well, ironically, one of the biggest opponents of making it a percentage at that time was the Michigan Chamber of Commerce. The Michigan Chamber of Commerce said it would be an automatic tax increase. As prices went up, because it's a percentage, revenue would go up as well. Now, today, the Michigan Chamber is back at it saying, fix the roads, that the roads are not fixed and there's been an underinvestment. So, in essence, they got what they asked for, and that's created this problem over the last almost 20 years.
Well, they're right. It is an increase in taxes each time, but if we have to address the increase in cost at some point.
Only with increased prices, yeah. So how do we do this while protecting our schools and locals? Number one, we put an amendment in the bill that said if our schools and locals during this transition period ever get less money, this is reversed. It's repealed. So we made sure that they do not get cut because of this transition. Now, what transition am I talking about? Over the next 6 years, we would take the 6% sales tax that is paid on gasoline that does not go to roads, and 1% per year for 6 years, we'd take 1% off the sales tax and add 1% to the gas tax. That's why it's a wash as far as the gas pump price is concerned, and that's why it's a wash as far as total revenue is concerned.
That, please?
Sure. For 6 years, so you have a 6% sales tax on gas. Today, your 19 cents equates to about 7.5, let's call it, 7.5% gas tax. So take off the 19 cents per gallon, apply a 7.5% gas tax. Then you have a 6% sales tax. So you got about 13.5% tax on gasoline. So that's the makeup today. In the first year, you'd take 1% off the sales tax, add it to the gas tax.
Wait, but year one in the House's plan going to be a wholesale percentage?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
So it is going to be year one. We're going to have a big change, which means it goes from the flat tax to what you deem at some point is going to be a zero-sum game, 7.5%.
Yeah.
And you're going to increase the wholesale tax by a percentage point and do what?
Decrease the sales tax by a percentage point. So I was just explaining that you got 13.5% tax on gas then, and we can agree that that's revenue neutral today at today's prices. And so the next year you'd have an 8.5% gas tax and a 5% sales tax, still equaling 13.5. The next year you'd have a 9.5% gas tax and a 4% sales tax, and so on and so forth until you've transitioned all of the sales tax to the gas tax. Now, the reason we do that is to protect our schools and locals. If our economy grows, it should more than make up for that. In fact, schools and locals would still see an increase over this period. Now, that's where people quite quickly get excited, and they say, well, what if there's not an increase? What if the economy doesn't improve?
Magic word is if.
Right. Well, what happens today? Let's take this proposal off the table. Let's not change the law. Let's not fix our roads. Let's keep things exactly the way they are. If the economy doesn't grow, revenue for schools and locals won't grow today. If the economy tanks or if gas prices continue to fall, there will be less money for schools and locals today, even if we don't make a change. So what they're saying, they're fearful of the economy going sour or gas prices continuing to fall. And they ought to be fearful for that today. They will see the same result, cuts to schools and locals, with that outcome today without a change. And that, I think, is missed by a lot of people. And then you can look back to the Granholm era and see that play out. That's the last time state funding for schools was cut, and that's because the economy was so bad.
So I think two things I learned here and wasn't explained well in the articles written about the plan last week, which is that the wholesale price starts immediately at 7.5%. Is that a baked in the cake, 7.5? At least that's what the bill says now, or does it depend on the date that it's the price of gas and the date that it's passed?
We're picking it.
Okay.
As we're negotiating, we got several different folks trying to look at gas prices, wholesale gas prices, make sure it's equivalent. But what we're seeking to do is take 19 cents off and make it an equivalent percentage.
Of 7, so and let's say 7.5%, and then each year 1% will come off of one and it'll be adjusted to the other until it's all wholesale at that point. And this is not going to generate $1.2 billion right away a year, is it?
No, it takes 6 years to ramp that up. But remember, I said the Senate took 4 years to ramp up.
So that's
to
another
1.2.
question I was going to ask you. The Senate's bill isn't $1.2 billion next year either.
Correct.
So no one's looking for $1.2 billion next year to start on the roads.
We can go into that, but I think that would create inefficiency and inflation if you just dumped $1.2 billion next year into the roads. I think you ought to phase it in.
Yeah, I did talk about that. I remember seeing an article and your comments about it. We talked about it last week. You're listening to Live with Renk. My guest in studio is Speaker of the House here of the state of Michigan, Jase Bolger, Republican from Marshall. We're going to go to a quick break, come back. I hope we explained the gas tax plans well enough for you. If not, give us a call, 269-441-9595. If you have a thought, love to hear from you. Let's go on to the Religious Freedom Act. That's the big issue right now. And again, if you have thoughts, give us a call. You're listening to Live with Renk, and in studio with me is my guest, Speaker of the House here of the state of Michigan, Jase Bolger, Republican from Marshall. I do appreciate you coming in, Jase. Thank you very much. He's term limited out, so he'll be done December 31st. You will be done with fighting the good fight from the political standpoint, or in that arena, and we'll get to that at some point. Hopefully, I don't run out of time. You had a couple comments you wanted to make to close up, kind of wrap up the road funding bill before we get into the ultra sensitive religious freedom.
Sure, absolutely. And let me say that what's nice about being on the radio and what's great about being on your show is we can go into things at much greater depth than you're seeing in print and news articles. So thank you for really flushing out a lot of the details. The question that had come up, I think, from one of your listeners was, what about how do you protect against gas prices falling further and not having as much money for roads? Well
right, because they commented on a per gallon tax as well as a wholesale tax.
Correct. And so what we did is we did put a floor. And so we said 19 cents per gallon or the percentage, whichever is greater. And so that way, even if gas prices fall, we won't fall below the 19 cents per gallon that's charged today to make sure that we protect from defunding roads. That's not the direction we want to go. The other thing we did was we put kind of a ceiling, a floating ceiling, so that there is no windfall. If something crazy happens and gas prices shoot through the roof, that we make sure that there's no windfall, that can only march up a certain amount per year. The other thing, because
it's interesting that, and Jason and I were talking at break, and it's interesting how all these, I think, important facts never show up in an article. And I appreciate you complimenting the format of the show, and I love the long interviews. You know, I really try to stay away from short ones. But we're finding out things that bubble up in our conversation that you don't know, we don't know. So
well, and you look at the column inches in a newspaper article, they don't have the space. And I go on a lot of radio shows, Renk, and most of them are for 5 minutes. And when my office talks to you, you won't accept a half an hour. You always demand a full hour.
That's true. This time he said you were only going to come in a half an hour. I'm like, can you pick another date when he comes in? Because look, we'd be done. We'd be done right now. Right. We got on one topic. Go ahead.
Well, and the other issue that doesn't get covered in a lot of the news articles, because there's agreement. So the news articles are focused on where there's the disagreement. Now, there's a widespread agreement that we need to improve quality. So we also have bills that add warranty requirements to building roads, also increasing efficiency. We have added competitive bidding and adding fairness. We have diesel parity as well as heavy truck permit fees.
What do you mean by diesel parity? Oh, the gas fees.
Correct. Today, unleaded pays 19 cents per gallon and diesel pays 15 cents per gallon. So making those the same, again, going to percentage. And then the other is heavy truck permit fees and fines if they violate their weight limits. And so we are addressing all those things. They won't appear in most of the news articles because there's no fight about them.
Did you mention warranty?
I did, yes.
So where the roads, they're going to have to warranty the roads for at least a certain amount of time?
Depending on the size of the project and the scope, did they design and build it, or is it a repair? I have said I think we ought to publish exactly how long every repair should last, because some of them are only expected to last until the next freeze. But we ought to make sure that that we're clear with everybody about how long this repair will make. Without a doubt, without enough money, people have been skimming over. They don't have a choice. Again, I'll take back to the house analogy. If your paint is peeling on the exterior of your house, you only have enough money or time to put a coat of paint on, it's going to start peeling again until you get in behind and solve the moisture problem. The same thing happens with our roads. The biggest difference between us and Ohio, I get that question quite a bit, is how much we spend. Ohio spends way more to fix its roads. So when it does its roads, it can do it right instead of just skimming over the top.
I like the idea of letting us know what part, if it's supposed to be a short fix or a long fix, because people always think it's a long fix. see it's bad in a year and dump on government. Dick, thanks for calling in. Do you have a question? Dick?
Is this for Dick, did you say?
Yeah, Dick, you're on air. You're on Live with Renk. Where are you calling from, Dick?
Yeah. Yeah, I'm in Kalamazoo.
Okay.
The one question I have is 100% of the taxes that are going to be collected, these added fees, is 100% of it going to go toward fixing the roads, or is a portion of it going to go toward public transportation?
What the House passed, it says it's all going to go to roads. There is an Act 51 that governs this. I liken it to a funnel, and if you put it at the top of the funnel, it does go, including other transportation options. Now, if you put it in the bottom buckets, it goes about 60% to our locals and 40% to state trunk lines, but 100% to roads. I do want to be clear that when we're talking about state trunk lines, a lot of state trunk lines are what most people would think are local roads. For example, Michigan Avenue in Marshall and Kalamazoo Avenue in Marshall, the main east-west, the main north-south thoroughfares are not local roads, though they feel just like them. They're state trunk lines. So 100% to roads.
Whereas the Senate, I believe, goes to some beautification projects and public transportation.
Well, the total leakage, if you will, to non-road and bridge projects is about 11%.
From the Senate's plan?
If you put it in the top of that Act 51. And that there is strong debate. There are a lot of people who think we ought to be funding our transit options because those are transportation. So those folks are not.
So, Jase, will we ever meet again in a political stance or standpoint from your perspective?
I have no idea, but I have no plans to.
You have no plans to?
No. It is a good thing you didn't have me sing that. Anybody who sits next to me in church can attest to that.
I really worked on that song this morning for quite a while to, oh, you're one of those church freaks, huh? Okay, I just caught that. All right?
Ouch.
No, I do too, but that's what I get. I cut that into the specific words I thought would be apropos. Religious Freedom Act, you brought up. Man, we're just kind of sliding into these things. That's the big buzz right now is this Religious Freedom Act and what you in the House are trying to do. And it's kind of funny who's against it and why they're opposed to it is harkens back to the whole Michigan Chamber of Commerce thing you were saying about the gas tax bill in 97 is what I think. Where are we at in the House and your position and the House's position, at least as the bill was submitted to the committee on this Religious Freedom Act?
Well, here, the bottom line is I believe we need a society that respects one another. I don't believe anybody should be discriminated against because of who they are, nor do I believe anybody should be forced to violate their religious beliefs. And so about a month ago, I announced support for amending the Elliott Larson Civil Rights Act to include sexual orientation as a prohibited item for discrimination. Unfortunately, the left blew that up. They wanted specific language added in there for transgender, and no matter how many times we showed court cases and legal decisions, legal opinions, that they were already covered under sex. Just like you don't have to add race identity, you have race in the act. They refused to go along instead every time, saying what they were going to do was go to the ballot. So it became clear they preferred a ballot instead of a legislative solution. So unfortunately, that path has ended. However, on a
so
separate,
when you say that,
yes,
they want it as a campaign issue, it sounds like.
Well, I'm always careful not to ascribe other people's motives, but they were very clear they want it on the ballot in 2016.
Right. It was their way or no way.
And what happens then is people can collect signatures, grow their database, raise money, so on and so forth, over keeping an issue alive.
Right.
And so then on a separate but parallel path, I said at the time that I supported a RFRA, Religious Freedom Restoration Act, and modeled it after the federal government's RFRA. Now, the history of that is back in 1993, there had been a U.S. Supreme Court decision that caused Congress to act in 93, and Ted Kennedy supported, Bill Clinton signed a federal Religious Freedom Restoration Act. Now, that covered all laws, all ordinances in the country for 4 years. In 1997, the United States Supreme Court said that Congress had the ability to enact that with regard to federal law, but they could not enact that with regard to state and local laws. States would have to do that. Since then, about a couple dozen states have enacted their own. And in fact, in 1997, Michigan had a Democrat introduce a Michigan RFRA. That passed the House at the time unanimously. It did stall out in the Senate. It stalled out in the Senate because, as we go back and I talk to people who were around at that time, they say the Senate was concerned about the flood of lawsuits that they would get from prison inmates and the increased cost. Important to note because 3 years later, in 2000, the federal government instituted a RLUIPA. Sorry for all the acronyms, but that applies to religious land use and Incarcerated Persons Act protections. So the bottom line is, in 2000, the federal government answered the question that they were concerned about in 97, and that is providing inmates the religious freedom protection. And the Corrections Department has had to live with that, has had to deal with that. And they do make sure that people who are Jewish have kosher meals and people who are Muslim have meals that follow the halal tenets. Literally, what I have proposed, what I'm asking for is what Bill Clinton signed, what Ted Kennedy championed, and what Michigan's incarcerated felons have. I'm only asking that Michigan's free citizens have the same protections that Michigan's prisoners have.
And who's against it other than the LGBT? Is the ACLU also involved?
Yeah, they helped write it at the federal level. They sue all the time Michigan under the RLUIPA, and yes, they announced that they oppose
what they wrote.
What they wrote at the federal level.
That's interesting.
And you ask who's opposed. I'll tell you, if you look at my Facebook over the last couple of days, or last couple of weeks, even the last month, as I announced my support of these two protections of individual liberty, everybody warned me that if I did that, I would stand in the middle and I would take incoming fire from both sides. However, I have to tell you that I've received far less anger or animus because of my announcement of support of gay rights than I have in my announcement of support of religious rights. The opposition to religious rights has been vile, vulgar, and violent. People do not respect people who have religious beliefs. It's always accused that this is about only protecting Christians. However, in my committee testimony, I talked about the Jewish parents who couldn't deny an autopsy on their son who was killed in an obvious and uncontested accident because they believed that was unnecessary mutilation of his body and in violation of their faith. I talked about the Christian pastors who could not feed the poor because of local ordinances about the homeless. And I talked about Jewish and Muslim butchers who public health code, if they followed the public health code, meant that they couldn't follow the tenets of kosher and halal food preparation. There can be accommodations made, and so this says that government has to have a compelling interest in order to regulate the subjected activity, and that they've done so in the least restrictive manner possible. Even though this has been in place for 20 years, people continue to want to put up false arguments. They want to point to some claim somebody made. As you know, somebody can sue or claim anything. That doesn't mean it's going to prevail. We've got thousands of cases in 20 years history in this country. In fact, I'd go back to not just 20 years. We've got since 1776 in this country, demonstrating that not only is religious freedom important, but it can and should be accommodated.
Now, I got a question over the weekend or yesterday, because I think they saw that at my blog that you were going to be on, from Mike. He wrote, please ask the speaker why HB 5959, the Elliott Lansing expansion bill, and his bill 5958, the Religious Freedom Restoration Act, were not tie-barred when introduced. My fear is because they are not tied together. Governor Snyder could veto the Religious Freedom Restoration Act when it reaches his desk, but signed the Elliott Larson bill.
Well, that's not possible any longer because the Elliott Larson bill is dead. The left promised to blow it up and kill it, and they succeeded. They were very open. Those are their words, not my words. They said they would blow the bill up. They said they would kill the bill, again, for the disputes that we just talked about. So that's not the scenario he asks about is not possible. Why
but couldn't have been from the beginning tie-barred?
No, I said I would make sure that didn't happen.
Okay.
But as you go back, I believe that these should have been on separate but parallel paths. For all the reasons I've discussed, I believe the Religious Freedom Restoration Act has the ability and should stand or fall on its own. So while they're both key issues, I think, for individual freedom, they were not tie-barred for a lot of reasons, including that the left demanded that they not be tie-barred.
Why don't you explain real quickly what that means to people, tie-barred?
A tie-bar is a legal procedure that you use in the legislature so that an act or a bill cannot become law unless another bill also becomes law. So it ties two issues together.
Okay.
And so because of the Religious Freedom Act and the reason I believe that it should fly and the reasons I support it, I did not want to tie bar it the other way, and I didn't tie bar it the other way because the left demanded that I don't, so I gave them what they wished.
You listen to Live with Renk. My guest in studio is Speaker of the House here of the state of Michigan, Jase Bolger. We're going to go to a quick break, come back on the other side, try to get some more questions in, and I see someone online on the air on the phone wants to ask a question. See how quickly it goes, Jase? That's why I asked more. We have scant minutes left, so we'll be right back after this. You listen to Live with Renk, and my guest for his final interview as Speaker of the House here in the state of Michigan, Jase Bolger, Republican from Marshall. Jase, thank you very much for coming in. We only have a few minutes left. Real quickly, you wanted to make a point of what you said you wanted to do when you came in 11 and reelected in 13. And what you've accomplished.
Sure. Well, as you look at the last week, in the House, we've tackled roads, religious freedom, corrections reform, suspicion-based drug testing, and public notices. You said that you'd covered a lot of that in the last week. However, as you look back even further, in 2011, on opening day in the House, we discussed cutting our own office budgets, enacting a true 4-year limit for able-bodied adults to receive welfare, reforming bridge cards to curb abuse, completing the budget by the beginning of June with a forecast for the second year, repealing the MBT, reforming taxes for a lower, simpler, and broader tax structure, discussing difficult issues, including right to work and even a stricter dress code. Because of the legislature stepping forward, all of those things got done. Then in 2013, we talked about repealing regulations. Almost 2,000 are gone now. Improving adoption and prenatal care. Offering a quality education for every child in Michigan, regardless of their zip code. Expanding early childhood education. Achieving accountability for colleges and universities. Expanding skilled training opportunities in education. Continuing to balance the budget by the beginning of June and paying down debt. And fixing the roads. We're not done with all those yet, but we've accomplished most of those, and we continue to work to make sure that we accomplish them all by the end of the year.
What was the biggest thing you wanted to do but didn't accomplish, and it looks like it's not going to be?
Well, I never give up, but there are a couple that jump out to mind, including no-fault auto insurance reform, electoral college reform, reforming our electric system to bring down electric rates, and the Elliott Larson Civil Rights Act reform that we just talked about. The Elliott Larson is certainly off the table at this point. They killed that. The others we're still under discussion. There's a chance for electoral college reform, but
how do you want it?
I think what Pete Lund has proposed is very reasonable, and that says the more you win the state, the more electors you win. If you do win the state, you win the volume or the majority of the electors. The congressional model was it did produce the potential for results that someone could lose the state and win the electors, and I would concede that that wasn't the goal. It's about representation of all Michiganders.
I laughed last week, and I can't remember if it was Democrat from Ann Arbor, Gretchen.
Rebecca Warren.
Was it her who said she thinks we should go for a national popular vote?
Might have been.
I was blown away. My example was we could have 5 million people here vote for President Obama in Michigan and 0 for Mitt Romney. But if Mitt Romney won the national vote, this Democrat in our state, no, she's a senator.
She's a senator in the state.
And the state would say we have to vote for Mitt Romney. Or vice versa.
Right, all right, absolutely. And
I was blown away by that.
I've been on your show several times where you've had a caller who's called in and asked about the Electoral College, saying it's not fair that one area of the state gets overrun by another area of the state. That kind of requires the congressional model, but for the reasons I just talked about, the congressional model does have its challenges. I think the proportionate representation has very good selling points to make sure that all voices in Michigan are heard.
no fault. Why did that stall? Because we have such a problem with high insurance rates here in Michigan. Why couldn't that move forward?
Fear mongering and special interest. Simply put, we do have among the highest auto insurance rates in the country. We do also have the best coverage in the country. So nobody wants to lose the best coverage in the country. While we have opportunities to reform the system to maintain the best coverage in the country and bring down the cost, it's too easy to fearmonger, and those who get all the money from the best coverage in the country are well invested to make sure that no change happens. So they're ready to tout all sorts of scary stories that we can make sure won't happen. But then people fall prey to that, susceptible to that, and suddenly they turn around and say, well, I guess we don't want change after all.
So on January 1st, 2015, when you are now titled former Speaker of the House and you are in no political position, what are you, Jase Bolger, going to be doing in the upcoming years?
I'll be wearing a big smile on my face watching football games on January 1st. Beyond that, I have a small business, and I look for business opportunities. I knew that this was temporary. I didn't get into this for a career. I saw that we had big challenges in the state, and I sought out to try to do what we could to fix them.
So no state senate run or congressman or what have you right now in your mind?
I don't have any such plans, and neither does my wife.
Well, I can understand. A lot of times the bug catches you, they say, and then you just continue to want to do it, but possibly not you. My speaker, again, I just screwed that up again. My guest in-house, Speaker of the House, Jase Bolger, here in the state of Michigan. He'll be term limited out at the end of the year. Jase, thanks a lot for coming in. I appreciate that.
Renk, I always enjoy it. Good to be with you.
You're listening to Live with Renk, and we'll be right back after this, and I'll take some of your questions.